Hey everyone, my name is Brock Blake. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Lendio, the nation's largest marketplace for small business loans, coming to you live from our headquarters in Lehi, Utah. Super excited to have Bill Briggs with us today. He is the industry expert on all things PPP, and I'll introduce him in great detail here in a minute. We are going to be covering a bunch of things about the PPP program today. And all the learnings we've had, the creation of the PPP program, how this second round is different than the first round, and some other status updates. And before I get to Bill and introduce him, I'm going to start with just a couple rapid fire updates. I'm sure many of the small business owners that are here have applied through Lendio, and our goal is to provide you as much information as we possibly can about what's happening. So there's some good, some bad, and some ugly. We're gonna give you a few updates on. Number one, we've submitted over 5,000 applications to our lenders and who are submitting them to the SBA thus far, and totaling about $500 million in volume. Candidly, we haven't really even started yet. We've got a lot of demand, and there's a great opportunity for us to help many more small businesses. And because of, as you know, last time around, we helped over 100,000 small businesses secure about $8 billion of PPP loans. We have many of you that are coming back for a second loan, and we're grateful that you would put your trust in us for a second time. We also have many new customers that are coming. Last time we hired over 250 agents to take care of you. This time with the demand, we've hired over 1,000. And so we're trained onboarding with all those agents and getting them up to speed. And that's been a learning curve in and of itself. And we appreciate your patience with them and with us as we try and do everything we can to meet the demand. There's a few things we've learned thus far. There are a few new requirements with the documents that are required for approval. We're going to talk about that in great detail, and a few tweaks, nuanced tweaks with the application that are different than last time. As a result, our engineering team has kind of spent day and night revamping the application so that we can have a much more customized path for each business owner and their entity type. So every entity is different. An LLC is treated different than a C Corp, which is treated different than a sole prop, which is treated differently than an S Corp as far as what documentation you need and to meet the requirements. So we made a change last Friday to update the program and have kind of your choose your own adventure path based on your entity type and very specific document requests. So if you haven't had a chance, if you haven't been approved and you're still curious where you're at, there's a chance that your application may need another doc. The most common docs that are being missed when we go to validation before we submit it are, number one, your identification, driver's license for all owners. Number two, a document that shows that you were in business on February 15th. And number three, the appropriate tax documents, tax return documents that show to justify your payroll. So we encourage you, if you haven't been back in on your application since Friday, we'd encourage you to log back in, click edit on your application, and update that. We've had a couple learnings and one painful mistake. Let me just mention the painful mistake. We, as you know, as the nation's largest marketplace, not only do we fund PPP loans, but we also work with every different type of loan product out there, from working capital loans, lines of credit, SBA loans, equipment loans, and so on. And we had an automated email set up where when a customer would come in and didn't meet the criteria of a lender, they would get an email that says, unfortunately, you don't meet the requirements and you're declined. That email is set up for non-PPP customers, and some of the customers that met the criteria of that automated email received that email over the last few days. If you did, that is an email that was in error, and we apologize that you received it. It probably created way too much angst and anxiety. We've reached out to you via email to correct that, but we want to let you know that you're not declined, that was an email in error, and we apologize for that. A couple last updates. Well, actually, we'll cover some of those here in a minute. We are making progress, and we appreciate your trust in us, and anxious to continue to help you navigate through this process, connect you to the right lenders, and get approved for the PPP loan that you are seeking. We'll talk about more details here in a minute, but I want to bring in Mr. Bill Briggs, because I know you're not here to listen to me. You're here to listen to Bill. Bill, for those of you that don't know, I'm going to tell you his official title, and I'm going to give you a disclaimer. But then I'm going to tell you that the unofficial who this man is. So he's the former Deputy Associate Administrator of the SBA, basically in charge of all small business loan programs, including EIDL loans and PPP loans. He was also responsible for all small business lending and large financial institution partnerships. Former because his last day at the SBA was a few days ago now, right, Bill?
Yep.
And so we need to make sure that we give this disclaimer that Bill does not speak for the U.S. Small Business Administration, the U.S. Department of the Treasury, or represent the government in any formal or informal capacity. The views presented here are his own, and such views shall not constitute professional services or investment advice. All information in this presentation is publicly available and accessible, and is not material, non-public information, or proprietary information. Further, any information provided during this call shall not constitute advice or guidance on behalf of or for the government or independent third parties. For official guidance documents, participants should consult materials presented at www.sba.gov or www.treasury.gov. So with that, I'm so happy to have Bill here, because let me just tell you, Bill is the man who led the entire PPP program. And this is an incredible program designed to help small business owners. And there is literally no one on the planet that knows PPP better than Bill. And to have him join us a few days into his trying to get a little bit of rest is a great treat. So Bill, thank you for joining us today.
Brock, and thank you for having me here today. And thank you everybody for participating. I do hope you find this presentation somewhat helpful. As you clearly stated, I am no longer with SBA and not providing any investment or official advice. But what I hope to do is clarify what is already public and make that accessible for you. It has been a tremendous honor in my previous role. And the great thing about it was I got to help small businesses and their employees and work with tremendous lending partners, including Lendio, throughout that process. And when I was offered the opportunity to further work with small businesses and continue to explain this program in an accessible way, I wanted to do that. So very clear, I am not an official. I am not speaking on behalf of SBA. And I do hope you benefit from this presentation. So thanks, Brock, for having me here today.
Yeah, our pleasure. We have to start off first. Tell us what it's like to have been on the ground floor working, with your counterparts at the SBA to stand up such an incredible program. I mean, what has your life been like over the last 10 months?
It has been probably, like everyone else, very stressful with the pandemic and all of that. But to give some context, at the end of 2019, SBA had an annual budget of about $1 billion and 2,400 employees. And its lending authority, give or take, was $45 billion. So if we had all of our resources were to be used, it was $45 billion. And we were known as SBA was known as a small agency back then. Flash forward to the passage of the legislation to deal with the pandemic and help struggling small businesses. And now you have a situation where SBA's budget has, the annual operating budget has grown by leaps and bounds We've hired thousands of personnel and contractors, SBA has, and that the lending authority or the budget authority, SBA, is over $1 trillion, which, to give context, is almost twice the annual Pentagon budget in 2019. And the Pentagon has over 2 million employees between the active military duty and civilian workforce, and our budget's bigger with a fraction of their employees. So it has been a tremendous honor to work with those employees, and they have done an incredible job. People should be very proud of this public-private partnership and how hard those employees at SBA, Treasury, and many federal agencies that you might not be aware of have worked over the last year.
It is really, truly incredible. It's meaningful work and punching way above your weight class as far as the amount of impact that you've had on the U.S. economy and the lives of small business owners through this program has been, and with the small amount of resources, is really mind-blowing. It's incredibly impressive, and so many of us are grateful for your amazing work. Let's talk about the current state of the PPP program. Some of the last data we've seen is that, last time it was craziness. I mean, everyone was doing it for the first time, trying to get the loans going, lenders doing it, SBA trying to stand it up based on the guidelines, and the loans. The demand was so high, and in a matter of like 10 days, the loans were gone. There is a tremendous amount of urgency, but it appears to be that the pace in which these loans are going is significantly slower this time than it was last time. Maybe can you talk to that a little bit? Was that by design, or it's just the realities?
No, it's definitely by design. And one of the things that SBA decided to do was to take some of the lessons learned from the rollout in 2020 and make it a lot smoother for all parties, for lenders, for borrowers, so that people wouldn't be panicked. And if it's one message I could deliver today, or two messages, it's one, have hope, and two, be patient. And have hope because Congress has allocated over $285 billion for this round of PPP lending. And the very smart people who have modeled this out believe that's enough to meet the demand for this new round of PPP. So there is plenty of money, and we don't anticipate, our SBA and the official guidance is that this will not run out of money, and some of the initial data that has been released publicly suggests that as well. The other thing too, though, is to be patient. That this Economic Aid Act, which was passed at the end of last year, is a lot more complicated for both borrowers and lenders and for the federal government to implement. And so it may take a little bit longer just to make sure that things are run appropriately and that the program maintains its integrity, that taxpayer funds are protected. But that, again, it will work, and that program also expanded eligibility for a lot of new small businesses. And so people who may not have benefited from the first round last year can go this time and get a loan, or people who already got a loan can get a second draw loan too. And so I would again encourage people to be very hopeful, encourage them to consider how they might benefit from the program, but also to be patient, that the lenders, that the lender service providers, and that everybody is working as hard as they can, understanding the urgency, but an ounce of patience will go a long way, and trust that the money will not run out.
Some of the latest, you mentioned some public stats. Some of those public stats that we're seeing here is, after 1 week of being open, 60,000 loans approved, which is only 1.5% of the loans actually funded in rounds 1 through 3 or through August 8th. There was, I can't remember, with 1.7% of the $285 billion allocated that have been approved thus far, predominantly from small loans reserved from community lenders. Maybe you can talk about that, the move to be able to start with the community lenders and the focus on these smallest of small businesses.
Yeah. So one of the lessons learned that SBA took from that from 2020 and rolling out this legislation in a more orderly and coherent fashion was to make sure that the people who are most impacted and the communities most impacted by the pandemic, particularly minority, underserved, women, and veteran-owned businesses were able to access the program. And so SBA's approach was to work with what are called community financial institutions, which are basically generally small community-based lenders who have expertise in reaching those communities, and make sure that they had first access to SBA systems, operations, and support, so that they can serve those neediest customers first, and to make sure that SBA was very clear in how it was presenting itself and its intent. And so SBA sent that message to the lending community and everybody involved that, hey, we're going to take care of these people that have been most impacted first. And the way we're doing that is working with these specialized lenders. Then they gradually opened up the program to community banks. Over 4,000 community banks have participated in PPP. And community banks, again, have great expertise at reaching local communities and providing that hands-on service that they're known for. And then I think last Tuesday, the program opened for all lenders. So, large fintechs, large banks, and everybody. And it has, according to the public accounts, worked very well for people, and that everybody understood that indeed, SBA was trying to reach those communities hardest hit by the pandemic and make sure they got that aid first.
Talked about some of the changes that were made. Let me mention one specifically. Last time when the lender would ping the SBA portal known as eTran, we would get an immediate approval or decline on the submission. And right now we're hearing that there's from the time it's submitted until it comes back with an approval or response from the SBA, it's about 48 hours or so, give or take. What is happening? What I know, but I would love to hear what's the change that was implemented in that from the time it was submitted to the time that's getting back to help protect taxpayers' money?
Sure. So let's, maybe a 30-second history lesson, because it happened last year. Was Congress created this program, and originally the program or the loans were supposed to last 8 weeks, with the idea that would help businesses and nonprofits that were shut down by government mandate to prevent the spread of the pandemic pay their employees. So they would prevent mass unemployment, and that was the design of the program. And then obviously the program has expanded since, both through acts of Congress or laws, and then some regulations as well. And throughout this whole program, the effort by both the legislative branch and then regulations has been to make it generally easier for both borrowers and then their lenders. That policymakers in Washington of all stripes understand how hard hit small businesses have been by this pandemic, and they want to do everything they can to support them and provide that assistance. But also, too, obviously, when you're talking hundreds of billions of dollars, you need to make sure that somebody's watching out for the taxpayers and that money is being used appropriately. So last year, when you talked about the sort of almost instantaneous processing by SBA, that's what happened. And so there were some challenges with that, as has been publicly noted. But also, too, again, one of the things that SBA thought through was how do we make this a better experience for everybody, but also better protect the taxpayers? And I think what SBA is trying to do is, make sure that some of the identity management and data verification, i.e. the applications, all the necessary information is filled out and people say who they are, before they actually process and provide a loan number back to the lender. And the lender needs that loan number and to make the loan or to actually provide funds. But it's also going to help, I think, throughout the life of the loan. If you just think not only when you're getting the money, but also, too, ultimately, the design of the program is to provide these forgivable loans if you use most of the money for payroll expenses. And so if you think about it in a life cycle, hopefully this kind of upfront verification will help on the back end with forgiveness and make that process much more smoother for the borrowers as well.
And I love that, we all want as small business owners, we are looking for and need and want that capital as quickly as possible. But we're all taxpayers as well. And so to put in some of those important checks along the way to reduce the ability of, fraudsters getting money into their hands and blowing it on, frivolous things, I think is beneficial to all of us, and that means the true small businesses are going to get the money, not others. And so I think it was a much needed and great move to be able to do so with that check.
And I think too, the banks and the lenders want to make sure that they're giving money to people who deserve it too. So they're a partner with the federal government in this, and they want to do right too, and they want to abide by their own law. So it makes sense for everybody, even if it takes, again, per my earlier message, an ounce of patience on the upfront and with hopeful patience really will help people get through this process this time.
Let's talk a little bit. Let's get a little bit specific, if possible, around like if I'm a small business owner and we've got people asking questions now in the chat box, and obviously every question is specific to them, and we don't want to get unique to each individual, but a couple generality questions around kind of the application and what are some of the changes that were made from the first round to this round as far as additional documentation or other things that they would need as part of their second draw or part of the application this process this time?
So they're generally, again, with the thought is to make sure that the documents are there up front, to make it easier on the back end for both lender and SBA to forgive these loans. And so generally, when you're if you're going to find a lender and work with them, or use a resource such as Lendio to find a lender, that you can you should be thinking about your some of your tax documents based on the type of business you are. Look back, make sure you're you have an idea of when you actually became a business, if you registered your business with your state or something like that, because the core requirements of any PPP loan are you have to have been in operation by February 15th of 2020. You have to meet the employee size standards, which for most businesses should work or be below 500 on a first loan and below 300 on a second draw loan or second time loan, and that you have that documentation to prove it. On certain loans below, if you're getting a second draw loan or a second time loan this around, you should be able to prove, show your lender that we have payroll records and our tax documents for 2019. You're also eligible to use some of if you have not filled out your 2020 tax documents, you can draft them and attest to them, not submit them to the IRS, but provide those to your lenders. Some of those are the things that people should think about. There's also tremendously good guidance on SBA's website and Treasury's website about actually how to calculate those loans and what documents, including tax documents, may be available. So again, I would encourage people to look at those government.gov websites and to get the most accurate information.
Great. There's a common question that comes that I think is not totally understood yet, where a business was in business on February 15th, but since then has had to temporarily shut their doors, because they, for whatever reason, it might be government restrictions, to meet COVID guidelines or other things like that. Are they eligible for a PPP loan?
Yes, generally yes, as long as they plan to then, reopen and continue to be in operation, and as long as they are not a bankrupt or in some sort of violation of the law, they should. If they, there unfortunately are situations where, example, a restaurant may have to shut down because, they're just not able to keep operations, let alone pay their employees, and so they're temporarily shutting down. But you should not get a loan if you plan to be permanently shut down. The idea is that you're going to restart your operations and use the funds to meet your payroll obligations.
There are some, I love the changes that were made around, obviously this loan needs to be used for primarily payroll, 60% of the loan for payroll, but then there were some additions to the items that count as forgivable expenses. And whether it's using it for your PPE equipment or meet the safety guidelines of COVID in your area. Maybe can you just mention a couple of those tweaks and changes that I think are critical components of this loan?
Yeah, so again, this really echoes what I said earlier about Congress over the life of this program, trying to make it easier for the small businesses to offer them guidelines or set the parameters of the program so that they really can meet the most pressing needs of these impacted small businesses. And so in the Economic Aid Act that passed at the end of last year, they did include additional expenses that may be covered in terms of that, including using some funds or operating costs to put in personal protective equipment to protect their employees. That makes sense against the pandemic. They've also looked at some of the group benefits that might be considered as part of the payroll. Generally, they were trying to say, okay, what defines payroll, who should be eligible, and what are some reasonable costs that should be covered in addition to payroll, or should be able to be forgiven in addition to payroll.
There was one specifically that I love that is like basically the way I described it, and we'll please reference the SBA, the guidelines that are posted on the SBA or Treasury. But the way I understood it was like if you have a software that is required to keep your business open, and those types of things that are like must-haves for each business type to keep your business open, now they can be included in that forgivable portion.
Correct. I mean, a lot of people use software platforms or something for their HR benefits or stuff like that. And it makes sense if you're trying to keep your payroll open that you have these systems or cloud-based systems to be forgiven, because they are obviously an expense of having a payroll. So again, this is part of Congress trying to, or making it more relatable and meeting more of the needs of small businesses who have been impacted.
A couple of questions here. Let's say the business was in business in February of 2020, but they were a sole prop, but then later changed to an S corp, or some other type of entity change. Are they still eligible for a PPP loan?
Right. So there should be, again, in addition to some of the tax documentation, payroll records, bank receipts, some sort of documentation that proves effectively you were in business in some form if you were a sole prop, and that you were, you had clients, and that you were providing goods and services as defined, as you would expect with a business, somebody in business.
Yep. Some people are mentioning glitches that are out there. They're saying on the SBA portal that are preventing submission of second draw apps for borrowers who submitted first draw forgiveness apps. I'm assuming that's probably one that you can't speak to or are aware of, and I'm sure if there is any glitch that SBA is putting all resources towards it to get it fixed.
No, so one of the things, and I believe this is in the public guidance, and so I mean, it's part of my effort to help small businesses in a different way now, is that you do not need to have that first loan forgiven in order to apply for a second loan. What you do have to do is have used all the funds of that first loan. So you can't have any money left over, and then try to apply for a second draw loan. And so that's the key thing, but you do not need the first loan forgiven. And that's a very common question. I love
that the money has to be used, doesn't have to be forgiven. But the way that was, I think it was well thought out. One of the things that you did under your direction at the SBA, and I'm going to take a step back for a second from the individuals and their applications, but is prior to last year, the SBA worked directly with FDIC banks and credit unions, and they had a couple, I think it was 14 non-bank, or something like that, lenders, but no fintech lenders. And so the fintech lenders were kind of on the outside looking in, and there was a bold move that made to allow fintech lenders to be included in the PPP loans, and hopefully that opens the door for other SBA loans in the future and getting guarantees with fintech lenders. Maybe talk to us about that decision, and what led up to that, or just maybe the guidance or the reasoning behind including fintech lenders.
Sure. So the first law that created the Paycheck Protection Program was the CARES Act. And the idea, again, was this was a national emergency, and that we were not trying, the government wasn't going to pick winners or losers, that they wanted as much aid by as many different types of lenders as possible. So obviously all federally insured banks and credit unions were granted access because of the regulatory regime and structure. And then also, too, the government decided to work with alternative types of lenders, including fintechs. And part of the logic was that they have expertise. In a pandemic where you're social distancing and you're not able to go to a bank and fill out an application, and essentially you're probably doing most of your application online. That the fintechs and their designs could play an important role, particularly reaching some of the underserved communities and people who may have not had a traditional banking relationship. And so the thought process, I think, from all levels of government, including Congress, was let's not, pick winners and losers here. Let's see how much good we can do in a short amount of time, because people are hurting, and that fintechs are part of the solution, and they certainly have done a commendable job, as well as all lenders throughout this process.
Love it. All right. Maybe another question that's not specific to PPP, but there were, as part of this most recent bill that was passed, and you've rolled out changes to the EIDL program and some of the express loans, increasing the guarantee, reducing the fees. We don't have a lot of time, but maybe in a quick response, talk to us about those opportunities, including the live venue grant. Maybe touch on a couple of those other things that are outside of the PPP loan.
Yeah, so great question, because again, PPP has been one part of a multi-pronged effort by the federal government to respond and help people who are struggling by the small businesses. So you've had everything from unemployment insurance to airline support program, because a lot of people weren't flying anymore. There's just been a tremendous amount of resources trying to help all types of individuals and businesses throughout the country. One of the things that in the Economic Aid Act that they recently did was they provided for, they changed the traditional 7A programs in 504. They increased the guarantee, so the amount that a loan was guaranteed to a lender by, and also reduced the fees. So they made it more attractive for potential small businesses to benefit, and they wouldn't have so many upfront costs. They also provided what's called a shuttered venue grant, and that is run by the Office of Disaster Assistance. The shuttered venue grant is basically meant to help live venues, so think venues where you would host concerts or performance arts or something like that, that they would apply to SBA and get a grant. So if you're interested in those grants or the EIDL program, you apply actually on the SBA website. But the idea, again, is that Congress is asking SBA to really up its game, not just with PPP, but all programs, to provide as much assistance as humanly possible. And the employees at SBA are working overtime. They're so dedicated. I wish people could see what they were doing and how much they've contributed. It really is an amazing thing what they are doing, and everybody is mission focused there and doing an incredible job on all the programs. And everybody should take pride in how great they're being served by these employees at SBA and the other federal agencies. That's
hopefully a message that comes out, is just the amount of work and the little sleep, not for days, not for weeks, for months.
For months. And everybody else, they're still dealing with the pandemic themselves. They're no different than any other American who is dealing with the general situation with the pandemic. But they also have this tremendous mission to try to be a part I say they're on the economic front line, just like doctors and nurses are on the health front line helping people. SBA and the federal partners are on the front line, really trying to help small businesses and really preserve the economy for tens of millions of Americans, and I think they're doing an amazing job.
They are. Okay, we got a few more minutes, and there's a lot of questions about kind of specific requirements for this thing, so I'm going to just go rapid fire.
Sure.
Obviously, second draw, you need a 25% reduction in revenue. Maybe just talk about what qualifies as gross receipts, and how are you measuring the 25% reduction in revenue?
Sure. So a few things on that. I've learned that to use very plain English. So when we talk a second draw loan, it means you are going back and getting a second PPP loan. So think second time when you hear second draw. It means you got a loan last year in 2020, a PPP loan last year, and your business has still been impacted by the pandemic. And so you need additional resources to preserve your payroll and keep your employees on the payroll. And so generally right now, if you need to go back and get a second draw loan, you have to, again, have been in business by February 15th of last year. You have had to had a first draw or a first-time PPP loan last year and used all the proceeds. And you also generally have to have 300 employees or less. There are certain size standards. And finally, the thing is you have to really demonstrate that your business is still being harmed by the current economic environment, and you have to document a 25% revenue reduction. So you're going to work with your lender and basically show that from a quarter-to-quarter basis or an annualized tax basis, your revenue has decreased by 25%. One thing to keep in mind, and this is a question we got often, is that gross receipts is generally all of your revenue. So it does not include the PPP or EIDL. But it does include if you got another type of federal stimulus. So let's say you're a doctor who got some Medicare fee relief or something like that. You got some other sort of CARES Act. You would have to count that fee relief as revenue or income in your gross receipts, which may lower your revenue reduction year over year or quarter over quarter. So that's something really to keep in mind, is that if you've gotten stimulus from a state-based fund or something else, that includes revenue. But generally you can say, listen, if I made, if my revenue all in was $100,000 last year, and now it is now $75,000 this year, or in a quarter-to-quarter basis, that I meet that definition, and therefore I'm eligible to receive another PPP loan to help pay my payroll. And so your lender will have that information, but that's how you do it. And again, SBA.gov or Treasury.gov have the documents of actually how you would calculate and show that revenue reduction.
A lot of people are asking, thank you, that was great, are asking about, okay, once I submit my application, what happens next? And obviously the lender has a certain fiduciary responsibility to review the docs, to go through the calculations, to be able to validate that the information is correct. Maybe can you just talk about that lender responsibility, what they need to do before it actually gets submitted to the SBA? It's not just get the file and submit it on, And I think that's sometimes the what people think.
Yeah, right. I mean, and this is where my message of patience comes in, but be hopeful, right? That people should be patient and mindful of really what it takes. So here's an example, is that you're a small business, you have your documents, and you're going back for a second draw loan. And, let's just say you're a small restaurant, you got a PPP loan, you have less than 300 employees, and you can generally show, yes, my revenue decreased by 25%, either in a quarter or over an annualized tax basis. Your lender will work with you to confirm that, and then you basically submit all that documentation. One thing, please do not go to your lender in person. Keep social distancing. Most of the lenders are folks like yourself. Lendio has an online platform to refer folks to lenders or something like that. Please use the internet in this resource because we don't want people getting sick and spreading the virus. But you would submit that documentation via a platform. The lender ultimately receives it however they receive it. They have to review that documentation, double check it, and make sure you meet all the appropriate qualifications. Make sure your loan amount is good, because if you're a restaurant in what's called NAICS Code 72, you may be eligible for 3.5 times your average monthly payroll, as opposed to 2.5 times, because Congress really wants to help the restaurant industry. So these are sort of things your lender's going to really pay attention to make sure that they're providing the most benefit to you. And then they're going to submit it to SBA. SBA is going to validate the information, making sure that it's consistent with publicly, what is out there in terms of resources and, identity checks and all that. And then, as you said, it usually takes 24 to 48 hours to be processed by SBA, assuming everything works well. And then the lender would get the loan number back. And the lender generally has 10 days in which to, submit closing documents and then fund the full amount to that borrower. So, when you kind of add up the days, it could be a week before you actually get that money in your pocket. And so that's why we're urging people to be patient, understanding that it can feel like an emergency right now, but that there is money in the program left, and that your lenders are doing everything they can, and folks like Lendio are doing everything they can to help borrowers through this situation, and that a little bit of patience will go a long way. Also, too, if there's a little bit of a delay from SBA processing, it might need to double check some data or something else. It does not mean you necessarily have been denied a loan. And so again, that's where you go in there with an expectation of, okay, this may take a little bit longer, but I'm going to get the money, and the money is going to be ultimately forgiven if I use it in the right way. And so, be mindful of that. And again, be hopeful though, and have patience. Trust me, everybody's working as hard as they can, lenders, Lendio, everybody, to make this work for you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think that, the lenders have responsibility as well. And if they don't do their job and they lose, and a loan gets funded that shouldn't have been loaned, they could lose their guarantee and they could be on the hook for that loan. And so every there's a process before it gets submitted to the SBA where you have to review the very detailed documents and by hand, by manual, and each one of them, and make sure the calculation is correct, and make sure all the IDs match up to the application, make sure the tax return has the business name on it, and all of these things by industry. It's more of a process than people think. So I only know because we see it on the back end, and I want people to understand kind of what's happening as people are working night and day to kind of get as many applications submitted, approved, and funded as possibly as they can.
Yeah, okay. I mean, Brock, I always talk about how great the team, the federal government employees have done a great job, but this was a public-private partnership. Over 5,500 lenders stepped up. Tens of thousands of lenders and their employees, lender employees, have done an amazing job and continue and are fully committed. Everybody, this is a true thing that gets lost sometimes in the noise about how both lenders and the federal government really stood up to try to help small businesses and nonprofits at one of the worst times in our country's history from an economic perspective.
Amen. All right, last question. It says, can we hear a little bit about the current economic uncertainty standard? It was pretty clear if you were shut down in Q2 of last year. What about under current conditions?
So generally, part of getting a second draw loan right now is you do have to certify that you're still under uncertain economic environment, and that you need the loan, and then that revenue reduction is kind of proof of that you can demonstrate and say, hey, my business has been hurt. In terms of if you're a first-time borrower and all that, for people who aren't familiar, you do have to certify that you need a loan. That it's not just a nice to have, or hey, I heard it could be tax-free money. That's fraud. If you really need the loan to pay your employees, you should certainly work with a lender or somebody like Lendio to get referred to a lender. But you should make sure that you need it and that you're going to use it the right way, because then it can be forgiven. Otherwise, you're going to have a loan, or you could be subject to other penalties too. And this is a time where they're closely watching these programs and the amount of money involved, and that they want to make sure that the resources are used appropriately. And so, be sure that you can say, hey, yeah, I have been hurt, or I'm under government mandate closure or something like that. It always helps to document why you're doing something, that could ultimately benefit you in a certain way, that you could show your lender and anybody else, hey, listen, we were hurt, or we were under local orders to shut down, or whatever, that we were definitely impacted by this situation, and that's why we needed a loan. But generally, I would also say too, though, don't talk yourself out of applying for a loan. Consult a professional, consult a service, consult a lender who can talk you through it and examine it with you. Don't just say, oh, that doesn't apply to me, I'm not going to do it. I want you to have hope, and I want you to continue to do best, because we need small business in this country to succeed. They employ most people, and they're going to be the future growth of this country. And so we really need small businesses to be healthy and successful. So don't talk yourself out. Work with someone who can say, yeah, here's how you can, maybe get a PPP loan or another benefit, and try it. And, work with some people who might be able to point you in the direction. And be careful, though, at the same time. Always refer to .gov websites for the most accurate information out there, and be smart. And, don't take any unnecessary risks. But, if this is meant to help small businesses across the country right now.
And I think that key word there is uncertainty, right? And I think that was a very deliberate word to be used, current economic uncertainty, because that could mean a lot about the state of your business, and you don't, things are changing pretty quickly with this pandemic, right?
Yeah.
And so, okay. I'm sure we have so many questions, we could go on all day, and I want to be sensitive to your time. I think everyone can tell, why we were so excited to have Bill joining us on this YouTube, and hopefully we were able to answer all the questions. Let me, before I wrap up, I just want to do two things. Number one, Bill, I want to thank you that you would take some time with us, and the resource that you are, the fountain of knowledge that you are on all things small business lending, and specifically PPP, is amazing. And also the incredible amount of work that you personally led with the SBA to get this program stood up. I hope that everyone that is applying for a PPP loan will say a little thank you in their heart for Bill Briggs and the entire team of SBA, because it is really impressive. And I'd love to give you a moment, any kind of final remarks that you'd like to share with the small business owners during this time, or any other items you want to cover.
Yes, I really wish all small businesses out there the best success, to be patient and to have hope. We'll get through with PPP, but we'll also get through the situation. And small business is the real economic engine of this country. It was an honor to serve the country and its small businesses. And I also just want everybody to rest assured that people at the federal government and myriad agencies, not just SBA, are doing everything they can to help people, and that they should be proud of the great work that SBA and other federal agencies have done, and that there are thousands of people trying to help you, both in the government and outside the government with lending partners, and that we want you all to succeed. So thank you for all the small businesses and nonprofits out there watching this webinar, and continue to do great work. We really need you.
Awesome. Thank you, Bill. You're getting a ton of thank yous on the chat right now, people that are very grateful for your time. I'm going to finish where we started, just with the quick updates because people have joined since then. At Lendio, we've submitted over 5,000 applications for about $500 million to lenders and to the SBA. We've hired over 1,000 new agents. We're training, onboarding them, shipping their computer stations to their at-home work, because we're all in the pandemic as well. Doing everything we can to make sure we take care of you, that we answer your questions, that we help you through this process. Review your application, make sure it's thorough, complete, and get it into the hands of a lender that can get you the money that you need. So appreciate your patience, appreciate your trust. I'll carry on the same message from Bill, that be hopeful and be patient, because we're in your corner and want you to survive through this difficult time. So thanks for your time today, everyone, and until next time, we're signing off. Take care.